Good morning, Year 8, and welcome to Lesson 2, Life in Britain in 1900, where we're thinking about, was Edwardian Britain a fractured society? So was Edwardian Britain a broken society? Was there lots of things that were going wrong, or was it actually quite a little positive time period that people were living in? So we're going to look at what life was like in Britain in 1900 and sort of the years before World War I, and you're going to start to think about whether you think that it was a fractured society, a broken society or not. Hopefully you got on all right last week with the suffragettes recap, and that information will actually help you with our lesson today. So first of all, I want you to pause the video in a second and think about what life you think would be like in Britain in 1900. You've done a little bit, you know, when you've looked at the suffragettes, but what do you think the houses would be like? What food do you think people would be eating? What was the population? Maybe a guess at the size. And how do you think people would have fun? I want you to have a go at drawing or writing down your ideas in your book, pausing the video and just seeing what you come up with for those 4 questions, because as we go through today's lesson, you'll start to get some answers. So the first thing I'd like you to do is have a go at watching this clip. Now I've screenshot it to show you exactly where it is on YouTube. If you type in Great Britain before World War I, it's by the Great War, as you can see just over here. And you'll be able to find this clip. It's about 12 minutes long, so it's not too long, and it's got lots of information. Now I've got 20 questions here, and I know it's very difficult for you to pause and write down all of those questions. That's an awful lot, and I'm not expecting that, but have a go at maybe answering 5 to 10. So pause the video and write down 5 to 10 of these questions. You can pick any of them from the 20 and have a go at watching and answering those questions, and then we'll go have a look through the answers together. So what was life like in Britain? Well, unfortunately, Queen Victoria died in January 1901, and Britain was a ruler of Canada, Australia and India. They were all still very much part and parcel of the Great British Empire, which you've looked at earlier on this year. The population of Britain at this time was around 41 million people, so it was huge. We know when we looked at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution a couple of months ago now, we looked at the changes that came about from moving from the Tudor period through to industrial Britain, and we know that the population was a huge thing that was increasing during this time. Britain's world empire was covering about a quarter of the London population. The national income was rising, it was 1.75 billion, so a lot of money was coming into Britain, which made some people very rich. Workers in trade unions, there's about 2 million, and this was really good for them because it meant that they could try and strike for them to have good working conditions. If they weren't happy, they could strike for these good working conditions. And we've looked at the Industrial Revolution, we've looked at how not everyone was happy with the jobs. We know particularly children had quite a rough time of it when they were working and the conditions weren't particularly great. So there was a lot of people trying to campaign to get better conditions to work in. 40% of the population were under 20. It was a very young population in 1900, got a lot of young people. And that means that, you know, a lot of them probably wanted a lot of change. The older generation didn't have as big a pull, so that could mean that a lot of changes were possibly underway. About 7 million people lived in London. Okay, so London was starting to get really busy, really quite crowded. We know that London didn't have particularly the best healthy conditions. We looked at cholera in the 1800s and how London was particularly not great, and we're going to look in a minute about how it's not really improved that much since the cholera outbreak in 1800s. School was mandatory up until the age of 14, so you only had to be 14 and then you would leave school. The literacy rate had a really big boom between 1870 and 1900. So it went from 40% of people being able to read and write to 97%, okay, which was a huge increase. And because of that increase, it meant that a lot of people could now read the newspapers, read leaflets that were being distributed, and there was a bit of an information boom. People started to understand and know a lot more because they were able to read and write. They could read books, we could read new novels, such as, you know, Dickens was writing at this time. Edward VII, who was the new king, liked to indulge in lots of card games and gambling. The gentry started to sell their land because they wanted to avoid their taxation. The percentage of the Anglican community attending services was about 10%. So if you think what life was like at the beginning of year 8, when we looked at the Tudors and we looked at the Reformation and we looked at, you know, medieval life last year and how, you know, everyone would go to church, everyone would pay tax. By 1900, we've now only got about 10% of people going to the Anglican community services. So church doesn't have as big a pull as it had when we first started looking at history all the way from last year. So there's huge changes that have come about in Britain over these, you know, a few hundred years. What's the name of the group fighting for the vote? Obviously you should know this because we did it last week. It was the suffragettes. Life expectancy, it was different between men and women, but we're starting to increase to about over 50 now. There were 937 strikes in the run-up to 1914, and this is, you know, a lot of strikes, and that causes a lot of work not being done, and that means that industry suffers when there are strikes. So it's not really the greatest thing for Britain to experience just before a major war. The BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, we're going to look at World War I next year, which is exciting, and this was the elite of the army for the British Army. They were trained really well, and they were exceptional, but there were only 150,000 of them, okay, so it wasn't massive, but what they could do was incredible. Britain's main rival at this time was Germany, and we're going to look at that a little bit more over the next couple of weeks, and when we look at the build up to World War I. And in 1904, Britain formed an alliance with France and Russia to keep them safe. So hopefully out of the questions that you did, you managed to get the right answers down. So this is a quick map just to show you of the British Empire at this time. So we've got Britain over here, as you can see, but all of the countries that are in sort of this pinky red, they are all part of the British Empire. And we've looked at the British Empire and we looked at how it grew and how it developed, and by 1900 it is still very strong, which actually, when we come to look at the First World War, is particularly handy because a lot of our soldiers that helped us fight in the First World War came from our empire. For example, in India we had over 1 million soldiers that came to fight and help us defeat our enemies. So what was Britain like? Well, where do we start? There was printed books that were widely available, so that meant that lots of people, obviously the literacy rate had increased, were now able to read. Before, people tended to know things by word of mouth, so this was a huge change. There was still a huge divide between rich and poor, and maybe that's, you know, fracturing this Edwardian Britain. Maybe this is causing the most problems. People are starting to have knowledge about germs and causing disease, so we're starting to see some changes. The rich are going hunting, they go to concerts, they go to fancy parties, but the poorer people tend to go to the pubs or music halls. But we're now starting to see short holidays because of the development of the railway in the Victorian period. People are starting to go on holidays to the seaside, and it was all very exciting. Hopefully this summer we'll be able to have some holidays at the seaside in Britain if we can't go abroad. Around 8 out of 10 people lived in towns and cities. Factories were still very common, and for food was kind of the same, but now you could buy frozen meat and fish, which was, you know, it lasted longer. That was amazing. There was a wider variety of fruit that was brought in from their newly explored places, and tinned and packet food was now beginning to become introduced. So the diet was beginning to change ever so slightly, but not a great deal in Britain. So why did people want, or why did they need change? Why, did we start to see these changes? You know, like the suffragettes wanting change, but there were other changes as well. Well, in the 1899, there was the start of what was known as the Boer War, which is it was in South Africa. And shocking statistics came to light. For every 100 soldiers that signed up to fight in this war, 40 of them were deemed to be unfit to fight. Okay, so 40% of people that volunteered to fight for the army were too unhealthy to fight. And in some big cities where there was a lot of poverty, as many as 90% of the people that wanted to sign up were seen as unfit. Okay, and that was a big shock because Britain obviously wanted to be the best and the biggest country. It had this massive empire, and to obviously keep that empire you needed to have your soldiers fighting across to help keep that, as we looked at when we looked at the British Empire at the middle of year 8. And then we've got a guy called Charles Booth, who was a social reformer and researcher. So he was someone that wanted to bring about changes for people in society, wanted to help people. And he carried out some investigations in London, and this was called Life and Labour of the People, because he wanted to investigate, what the health of the population was like. Have people, changed? We've looked at these big cholera epidemics. We saw the big stink, and we saw that things weren't great in London particularly. We even had a sewer system introduced. So why, by this time, are there still so many people that are deemed as unfit and not well enough? So Booth focused on London, and he saw that 35% of the population in London were living in poverty. Okay, and that was quite a big number. And he plotted his poverty on a map to show where the poor lived, where the rich people lived. And he took it to Parliament and he said, this is bad. We need to change this. We need to do something about this. And the richer side of Britain enjoyed a life of luxury and ease. They owned land, homes, many didn't work. The vast majority of the poor people lived miserable lives. They earned just enough to get by, but obviously they sent their children off to work where they could because that was another income to bring into the family. And people weren't happy. There was no, if you are off now today, you can get entitled to sick pay, or you might get pensions when you're too old to work. There's unemployment benefits. If you don't have a job, you can go to the unemployment centre, you can get unemployment benefits to help you to pay for your bills. And we also have the brilliant NHS, so we all have free healthcare, but none of that existed then. So if you didn't have enough money to feed your family, you definitely didn't have enough money for healthcare, you didn't have enough money to live on if you couldn't work because you'd had an accident at work and you were sick. So these were the reasons why there was such dire poverty, and the government didn't do anything about it. If you remember, when we looked at things like cholera, we talked about this word laissez-faire. The government kind of left people on their own to do things, and people wanted to get rid of this laissez-faire approach, this approach that the government wasn't going to intervene, and they felt maybe now it was time that they did act. And as well as Booth, there was another guy called Rowntree, and he also carried out an investigation, but this time he went to York. And if you know your map well, and hopefully you do, London's down south, York is up north in Britain. And he was shocked to find that 28%, so nearly a third of the people, didn't have the minimum amount of money to live on. So they didn't have enough money, the minimum you needed to buy necessary food and to buy necessary clothing. I don't know what happened there, sorry. So he printed it and called it Poverty, a Study of Town Life. So the fact that it wasn't just London where this was happening, it was happening in other cities across Britain, and maybe the government needed to realise that there was something they needed to do. So as a consequence, the government actually started to become a little bit more worried about the health of their workers, because Britain was, a leading industrial power, and at this time in the early 1900s, Germany had also started to undergo its industrial revolution and was becoming really quite powerful. And Germany was increasing its production on coal, iron and steel. They were becoming really quite a powerful nation, and Germany particularly looked at Britain and wanted to be better than Britain. So the government could start to see this was happening, and because people weren't happy or they weren't well enough, then that means they're going to do less work, and then the industrial power that Britain prided itself on is going to start to decrease. If they can't get enough people to fight and sign up for the Boer War, then obviously that's going to cause huge problems. There were three kind of main reasons why there started to become change in Edwardian Britain. There was political motives, so people wanted to be re-elected politicians, so they had motives. There was nationalistic motives, there was reasons and a need to improve the country, and also there were things called moral motives, so the increased realisation of the scale of the problem and people wanting to do the good and right thing. So what I'd like to do is have a go at copying out these 7 examples and categorise them, so you can colour code them, or you can just do like a table of 3 and put them in the right category. So pause the video and have a go at that. Let's see how you got on. So political motives were the Liberals, which was a democratic party, didn't want the Labour Party to outdo them in the next vote. So they wanted to help the poor people because working classes could now vote. We've also got individuals like David Lloyd George and Winston Churchill, key political individuals that obviously would have wanted to be re-elected and wanted to see changes happen. The nationalistic motives were Britain needing an effective workforce and also the Boer War kind of shocking everyone, particularly the government. And then the moral motives, we've got the social reforms, so Booth and Rowntree, those people that were looking at the problem and writing it up and giving it to the government. The life expectancy was about 45 for males and about 50 for women, but the richest 10% owned 92% of the country's wealth, and people started to realise that this wasn't particularly a good statistic. And increasing information about the issue of poverty from charities, civil servants and local authorities. So the Liberals, the government at the time, decided to make some changes because of these different reasons. In 1906 there were free school meals, there was free school medical services, Children and Young Persons Act came into play, there was the Old Age Pensions Act and the National Insurance Act. So these things were all there to help people, to make sure that people got money if they couldn't work, people got money if they got sick, so if they couldn't work for a few weeks they would still get a bit of an income, and that children, because they were obviously 40% of the population were under 20, children needed some care, and they put in lots of things to help benefit them. So have a go at just making a timeline, and you can put those all out in your books. Let's round this up together then by answering the question. So was Edwardian Britain a fractured society? Was Edwardian Britain broken? Was it split? Was there lots of cracks and rivalries? Or was it actually quite good and it was moving forward? There was still a lot of positives to take. So I'd like you to have a go at answering for both sides of the question. You can use all the knowledge from today's lesson, but you can also think about what the suffragette movement was like, and you can include the suffragette movement in this work. So please do use last week's work in your answer for this week as well. So why was it fractured? You could talk about the fact that there was a lot of poverty, there was a big divide between the rich and the poor. You could talk about the suffragettes and the suffragist movement, okay, and explain to me why that means that the society was broken. Why was it not working together and strong? Then I would like to have a go at answering why it wasn't fractured and it wasn't broken, and actually people were working together. So you can give examples like the Liberal government implemented lots of new reforms and they started to bring in free school meals. We've got people like Booth and Rowntree that wanted to help develop society, they wanted to bring it together, and therefore they were the ones that were pushing to help bring Britain back together. You could talk about people were going on holiday now, society was changed, the literacy rate was increasing. So go back through the slides and have a look just to improve all of that to help you develop your answer in this. And then finally, just to finish off, let's have a go at answering these 5 questions. These are the ones in your fact books. So what can you remember? Have a go without looking at anything. Pause the video and write your answers down. Hopefully you've got 5 out of 5, so the answers are all there, and they're also in your fact book. Hopefully that helped. Let me know if you had any problems with this video, or if there's anything you need me to go through again, just drop me an email. Next week we are going to look at Titanic, so we're going to look at again what life was like for people, and this will, when we look at Titanic, we'll continue to look at this split between the rich and the poor. Thank you very much, Eva, and I'll speak to you next week. Bye.